So whether you have worked in product management before, or it's a path you're going to pursue at some point, a question you will get very, very often is, what does a product manager do? You'll hear it from your parents endlessly. You'll have trouble explaining it because it's kind of a complicated and unfamiliar thing. Some of the things that might come to mind: managing a backlog, brainstorming features, leading a team. And these are all correct. Those are all right answers. But none of them is comprehensive. None of them really sort of fully explains the job of a PM. And so I'm going to try to persuade you tonight that there is one answer to this question, which is that your job as a product manager is to make hard trade-offs, to make difficult decisions. And I choose to make this sort of the one point that I drive home tonight because I think it's sort of unifying way of explaining everything. And when I realized this in my own career via some advice that I got from a mentor that I looked up to, it felt like it clicked all of a sudden. I sort of realized, okay, that's how I actually add value. That's what I'm actually here to do, is to help this organization make hard decisions. And so what we'll talk about tonight, one, I'll tell you a little bit about my background, how I ended up here. We'll talk a little bit about some of what I see as the common examples of hard trade-offs you might have to make working in product. A few frameworks, PMs love frameworks, for thinking about how to structure your thinking around trade-offs. And finally, some real examples, things that I've seen in my own career that I think illustrate these points well. So I've been lucky to get to work on some very cool products in my career, and I've learned a lot from doing so. There's also a tremendous amount that I don't know, so take everything I say with a big grain of salt. Many of you have probably worked in startups, for example. Startups have a very different set of incentives, set of resources than some of these companies do. I've spent about 90% of my career working in ads-powered businesses, which as I've transitioned to Airbnb recently, I've learned have a very different set of incentives and structures for building product. Some other facts that might help you get to know me: my academic background is in computer science and economics. Economics is the study of analyzing and pulling apart complex systems so that we can understand them better. Markets are some of the most complex systems we have. And computer science is the study of building systems, of getting computers to construct these systems to do jobs that we want them to do. And I think there's something really powerful at the intersection of these two things. And so I always pursue problems that help me understand that intersection better. A few of those problems that I've gotten to work on to date: at Instagram, launching ads in a product that was really known for creative quality. And ads aren't something that people always associate with creative quality. So how do you take this product that people love? This was 4 or 5 years ago, that is really known as a media sharing and creative platform around the world, and turn it into a business? Hard problem. Later on at Facebook, how do you take a product that is monetized already, plenty of ads in Facebook, but show more of them over time in a way that doesn't disrupt the experience for people coming to the product? Hard problem. And finally, today at Airbnb, I think about connecting people with great travel experiences, sort of operating this marketplace where people are looking for magical travel journeys in every corner of the world, and this huge community of hosts want to show people what it's like to live in their town and their society. And how do you make that match happen in a product and manage the trade-offs that come with doing so? A handful of the kinds of problems that I think you're likely to see in product work. Decide which feature to prioritize given some new requirement that comes in. Sort of classic product management. Has anyone heard of GDPR? Okay, lots. Wow, we're very familiar with European tech regulations. Very good, savvy group. So GDPR is a piece of legislation passed by the European Union a year and a half, 2 years ago, which had a set of mandates for any company operating in Europe and how they handle user data. If this comes out of nowhere for you as a product manager, you have a roadmap of work to do, you have features you want to get to your users, and all of a sudden there's this new thing you have to go do. You have to update your databases to be anonymized so that you can delete data at user request. So how do you change your roadmap? How do you, what gets dropped now that there's all of a sudden this new requirement? Kind of classic trade-off problem. Foundation versus growth. You can spend the next few months of engineering time migrating to some fancy new Amazon Web Services box that makes future development easier, or you can go build features that make your product better and help you grow. Which do you do? That decision is up to you. Benefit user one versus user two. This comes up all the time, especially in marketplace products. We'll take Airbnb as an example. You can introduce ID verification at the time you're making a reservation on Airbnb. Great for hosts, because then hosts know they're getting someone whose identity has been verified. Not so great for guests who all of a sudden have this new step they have to take when they're booking a place to stay. Hard trade-off. And there are lots of these examples. So the challenge then, given any of these decisions which you will inevitably have to make, is to convince both yourself and the people around you how to make this difficult trade-off. And I really see this as the central challenge of product management. Any other activity that you sort of do in your job, creating a roadmap, prioritizing features, helping a team decide what to work on, these are all trade-off decisions. And I think that by applying some structure to our thinking and doing so, not only can we learn to make better decisions, but we can also have a better way to communicate those to the people around us, which is just as important. So a few frameworks that you might use to approach any of these problems. And again, we love frameworks because they help us simplify our thinking. They help us tease out what's actually important and what's not in a complex space. And perhaps most importantly, they help make a much more convincing argument to other people. So in any of these decisions you're making in a product environment, you're not just making them for yourself, you're making them because you lead a team and you're trying to convince an organization of people to go in a certain direction. And having these frameworks in your back pocket, I think helps you get there. So let's talk about each in turn. The first is what I call unifying metric. So you have sort of option A, option B, whatever those two things are. If you can align those in the same space, which one of these is going to get me the most engagement? Which one of these is going to get me the most revenue? If you can somehow put them in the same plane, then it becomes very easy. You just pick the one that's the best option. As we'll see with an example soon, that can also lead you to oversimplify the problem. Not everything can be measured in revenue or time spent in your app, sales. And so it has some shortcomings that we have to be careful of. Second is vision. Metrics aren't going to answer every question for you, but one of the really important jobs we do for our products, for our teams, for our users is have a vision for what we want the product to be. We have some image of the world in our minds that we're trying to create. And sometimes making a decision is just about sticking to that vision, finding the thing that's most aligned with the future you want to see in the world. Third is incentive alignment. Sounds like a heavy political science word or something. But here we're really just talking about thinking about with any of these decisions you make, what incentives you are creating for yourself, creating for the people who use your product, because those can have really important consequences beyond the immediate point where you're making a decision. There's actually a whole academic discipline called systems theory, which studies this dynamic, the dynamic of how you create structures that end up influencing people to make decisions through incentives. And there's a lot to learn there. Last but not least, survival. If you're on a short runway, either because you're in a startup and your funding is going to run out at some point, or you're at Amazon and every business has exactly 1 year to prove that they can be profitable, and you're running up against that, then none of the other ones really matter, right? The revenue that you'll drive far down the road won't matter if you can't get past a certain point today. And so sometimes, in rare circumstances, the trade-off framework is this is what we have to do to survive and get a chance to keep working. So let's take a few real examples, and this is where I'll ask for some help from all of you to work through these with me. First is, how many ads should you show in newsfeed? So let's say you work at Facebook, you're the head of newsfeed, head of ads, and you're going to launch advertising on Facebook for the first time. This is going to be the revenue driver for the company over the next many years. But you're also risking hurting the user experience. People did not come to Facebook to see ads, they came to see content from their friends. So how do you make this decision? Incidentally, this is the kind of problem you're very likely to see in something like a product sense interview or an execution interview. So these are helpful to think through. So what do we think? Where do we even start with a problem like this? So we've got A/B testing, super important, and then understanding, maybe I'll sort of phrase it as understanding the impact of introducing ads on time spent. Fair? Yeah. Cool. So this is a great example of a time when a unifying metric will help us make a decision. So as we just said, if you increase the percentage of ads, we would expect someone's total time spent in the product to go down. Again, they're not there to see ads, they're there to do something else. And so each additional ad that you show in the product takes away from the value someone gets from the product, and therefore we'd expect them to spend less time, all the way to this extreme where if you have 100% ads, 0 time spent, they're gone, no more product. That's obviously a bad world. So what happens to revenue in this case? On the very left, we have 0 revenue because we're not showing any ads. On the very right, also have 0 revenue because everyone's gone. And so we end up with this kind of nice curve. If it's 0 on both ends, then there must be some maximum in the middle between those two. And so it turns out, in this case, revenue can actually be a nice unifying metric for helping you balance both the benefit to the business and the impact to the user experience, because they trade off against one another very nicely. What, though, might be a shortcoming here? What is a trap we might run into in a world like this? So there's this difference between long-term and short-term effects. This is the whole science of experimentation is trying to help us tease out this very problem. That if you're running a test for any short period of time, saying, okay, I'm going to add more ads to the product, and make any change to the product, you're only going to capture how people respond in the short term. And it's really unclear how, let's say 2 years from now, the impact of a change in perception of your brand is going to change how people use the product. So that's a shortcoming of this solution and something to watch out for. Another fun one. Should you allow non-square photos on Instagram? If any of you have a good memory, you'll remember that circa 6 years ago, all photos on Instagram were square. That was really part of the brand and something that was unique about the product. Any thoughts on why that was the case? Why were photos square on Instagram in the first place? Because they look like Polaroids? No, there was a better reason. Great presentation, maybe. I think that certainly became part of their product. If you think about profile is very much a grid. Nice to look at. The other reason is that it requires some work all of a sudden to post something. Our phones, cameras, everything takes pictures in non-square rectangles. And so all of a sudden, if you have to crop it into a square, it requires some work, some level of curation, some level of thought before you can even participate in Instagram. And that's really what separates this product from the Flickrs of the world, which is kind of like the other big photo platform at the time when Instagram launched. So you had to do some curation. And then there were tools to make that easier, filters, famous Instagram feature. And that's why this product launched the way it was. Well, now fast forward a bunch of years. You're no longer a startup app trying to compete with Flickr as a photo sharing platform and gain attention. You're now the leading media sharing platform and community in the world. But you still have this sort of requirement that you baked into the product, which is that everything is square and that you have to crop something before posting it. And you realize that there's this drawback, which is that that's holding some people back from participating at all. We say that it helps maybe create some sense of curation, which is good for the brand, but it also is adding friction to posting content. So then there's this debate. Well, do you stick with the square? It's part of the brand, helps keep things a little bit more curated. Or now that you're in this position of being this hugely used network, should you favor making it easy through non-square and eventually things like Instagram stories? Well, we know how this one turned out. And this is a great example of using vision to make a decision. There's no A/B test you could run here to tell you what impact this would have on Instagram over a very long period of time. But there is a conversation that you have with yourself as the leader of this product to say, what is the kind of community I'm trying to create? Am I trying to create a community of artists who are curating content? Or am I trying to create a platform where anyone can share anything and sort of share what they see in the world in real time? Back to numbers. Here we have a metrics design problem, very common in product management. So let's say you're operating a marketplace product. We'll take Airbnb as one example, Uber Eats, maybe Lime, scooter sharing, any of these products where you're trying to connect demand and supply in some way. There's very often this choice you have to make about how you goal the product, how you measure your success, and this goes for any product. In the case of these marketplaces, a common choice you end up making is, are you going to optimize for the number of transactions in this product or the total value of transactions in this product? So am I going to go on the number of times that someone comes to my product and gets value out of it, or am I going to go on the number of times multiplied by the average price that they're spending? So at first glance, what feels like the difference between these two things? Is this a meaningless debate, or is there some real reason why it's worth considering that question? So it might depend on what stage you're in. Let's say more about that. What ends up being different in these two cases, I guess? So you're changing what problem at the end of the day you're focused on by deciding which metric to set as your goal or the goal for your team. And this is an example of incentive alignment. In the first case, you're incentivizing yourself to make the product work for the most number of use cases. So if you're Uber Eats, you're incentivizing yourself to onboard as many restaurants as possible, to make the app fast and light so it works for as many people as possible, to launch on every platform. If your goal is on total transaction value, then you're incentivizing yourself to focus on the highest value use cases. So maybe you're going to double down on iOS, where people spend more on average. Maybe you're going to try and build features that convince people to throw a brunch at their house instead of just ordering a pizza. You're changing the kind of features you're going to end up building by selecting this metric. And so you have to ask yourself, as we just discussed, what stage are you in? What matters to you most right now? If you're an early stage company trying to capture market share, then growth maybe is the most important thing. If you're a public company and a mature product, maybe dollars and aligning with the business is the most important thing. You also, of course, have to ask, which is better for the supply side of your marketplace. Maybe, again, we'll stick with Uber Eats, fun example, it works for a bunch of things. If you're Uber Eats and you're thinking about what restaurants care about, what's going to make them happy, maybe they care about the total value of transactions, because that's closest aligned with their immediate dollars. But maybe they actually care about number of transactions because they see Uber Eats as a way to bring someone new and introduce them to their restaurant who will come back in the future. All important questions to ask. And so with all of this, what I hope you have is a toolkit, a small toolkit, to go make smart decisions about products. You are in the driver's seat and equipped with both some real-world examples and some frameworks that I hope are helpful in simplifying these problems. I hope you feel empowered to go make smart decisions about your products, and I'm excited to see what you do with it. Thanks a lot for your time.